mate? What if the perfect night you've been dreaming of, the one where your entire future feels set in stone, suddenly turns into a bloody nightmare? What if the person you trusted more than anyone, the one you believed was your rock, publicly guts you and leaves you for dead, right in front of a whole pack of gawking sharks? It was supposed to be the best night of Chloe Davies' life. The ballroom at Sydney's top hotel was a ripper, all golden chandeliers and polished floors, glittering as champagne flutes clinked in the hands of the city's wealthiest. They were all there to celebrate the success of O'Connell Global, the financial empire built by the powerful CEO, Liam O'Connell. At his side stood Chloe, 30 years old, and glowing with a hint of exhaustion, her hand resting gently on a small but noticeable baby bump. She'd come tonight, despite the morning sickness, determined to stand by her bloke, believing this night would be the proud beginning of their growing family. But destiny, that sneaky little devil, had a cruel twist waiting. When Liam took the stage, camera flashes popping like firecrackers, Chloe smiled with quiet pride. She figured he'd thank her, his loyal missus, the woman carrying his first child. Instead, he reached out, not for her hand, but for another woman's. The room went dead silent. A gasp, loud and sharp, cut through the quiet. Liam pulled a stunning brunette onto the stage. Jasmine Reed, his young and ambitious PR guru, smiled like a queen taking the throne. "This woman," Liam announced boldly, his voice booming over the sound system, "is the secret behind my company's latest triumph. She is the partner I choose to stand beside me, not just in business, but in life." The applause froze. A low murmur swept across the room like a cold blast of air. Chloe's smile shattered. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the whispers of betrayal echoing all around her. She instinctively clutched her belly, as if shielding the little life within from the humiliation that was burning her soul. Jasmine leaned into Liam, her perfectly manicured hand sliding onto his chest. Chloe's vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but her throat was locked tight. She could only stand there, trembling, her face completely drained of color, while the crowd stared, judging, gossiping. "Isn't that his wife? I heard she's pregnant, mate," a woman whispered loud enough for Chloe to hear. "Bloody oath, that's rough," another replied, shaking her head. Tears welled up, but Chloe refused to let them fall in front of these people. With all the strength she had left, she forced herself to turn away, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked out of the ballroom. Each step felt like knives twisting in her chest. Behind her, Liam didn't call her name. He didn't even glance her way. His arms stayed wrapped tightly around Jasmine. Outside, the Sydney city lights blurred through her tears. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she tried to steady herself against the cold night air. The whole glamorous facade of her life had just caved in. She wasn't just betrayed. She was erased, tossed aside like she was nothing. Chloe pressed her hand against her belly. "I won't let him destroy us," she whispered shakily. Her voice cracked, but a fierce determination flickered in her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, something stronger than the gut-wrenching pain began to grow. Because in that very moment, Chloe decided she would disappear from Liam's world forever. And when he came looking, he would never, ever find her. Chloe Davies had never imagined her life would become front-page news. To the world, she was the elegant wife of Liam O'Connell, the most talked-about CEO in Sydney. But behind closed doors, she was still the same girl who grew up in a small country town near Dubbo, raised by a single mum who worked 2 jobs just to put food on the table. Chloe learned early the value of sacrifice, humility, and holding on to your dignity, even when the world tries to pinch it from you. At 30 years old, she wasn't a socialite or a woman. Hungry for the spotlight, she was an interior designer, passionate about creating warm, meaningful spaces where families could feel safe. Her work wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every piece of furniture she chose, every color palette she created, told a story about belonging. That's all she ever wanted. A family of her own. A home filled with love. Not just expensive bits and bobs and designer walls. When she first met Liam, he seemed like the answer to every silent prayer. He was older, confident, successful. He swept her into a whirlwind romance filled with roses, dinners at fancy restaurants overlooking the harbor, and promises whispered under the Sydney skyline. For a girl who had spent her life struggling, his attention felt like a miracle. He told her she was his muse, his reason to believe in love again. She trusted him completely, even when friends warned her that a man like Liam loved power more than people. For the first few years of their marriage, Chloe fought hard to be the perfect wife. She learned how to stand tall at charity galas, how to smile for the photographers, how to hide the exhaustion when gossip columnists picked apart her outfits. Still, she clung to the dream that their marriage was more than just for show. And when she found out she was pregnant, she thought it was the turning point, the moment Liam would soften, the moment they would finally build the family she longed for. But the pregnancy wasn't easy. There were nights of nausea, mornings of dizziness, and quiet afternoons when she sat alone in their penthouse, her husband too busy at work. He rarely asked how she was feeling. Instead, he drowned himself in meetings, deals, and late-night calls that left her wondering if business was the only thing keeping him away. Chloe told herself it was temporary, that Liam would come around once he held their child. She painted the nursery herself, filling it with soft yellows and delicate stars on the ceiling. Every brushstroke was a silent prayer for a happy future. She even kept a little journal, writing letters to her unborn baby about the life they would share. The bedtime stories, the laughter, the simple joys she never had as a kid. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she sensed something was wrong. His eyes no longer lit up when he looked at her. His touch grew colder. She told herself not to overthink, but the fear lingered. That fear became a brutal reality the night Liam chose another woman in front of the world. And as Chloe walked away from that ballroom, she knew her battle had only just begun. The world Liam built was made of glass, steel, and shimmering lights. From the outside, it looked untouchable. Their penthouse in Sydney stretched across the top of a tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city that never slept. Every night, the skyline glowed like a promise, but for Chloe, it felt more like a cage. The penthouse was filled with a luxury most people only dreamed of: Italian marble counters, imported chandeliers, a walk-in robe bigger than the flat she once shared with her mum. Every detail screamed wealth, success, and status. Guests who visited often gasped at the view, whispering how lucky Chloe must be. But behind the glossy surfaces, loneliness echoed louder than any praise. Liam thrived in this environment. His world was one of endless boardrooms, private jets, and fancy invitations. At O'Connell Global's headquarters in Martin Place, he was revered as a visionary. Employees scurried at the sound of his voice, terrified of disappointing him. Jasmine Reed, the young PR guru, understood how to move in that space. She played her role perfectly, laughing at his jokes, aligning herself with his ambitions, presenting herself as the woman who got his hunger for power. Chloe, on the other hand, felt like a shadow moving through those glossy halls. She had once gone with him to the office, carrying homemade lunch just to spend an hour together. He brushed her off with polite smiles, too busy to even eat what she made. In the conference rooms, she sat quietly, ignored, while Jasmine's laughter filled the air. It was in those moments that Chloe realized she didn't belong in Liam's world, not because she wasn't good enough, but because he had stopped wanting her there. At home, the luxury mocked her. She could wander through 10 rooms and still feel alone. The nursery she painted with her own hands was the only place that carried warmth. In the rest of the penthouse, the silence was suffocating. She often sat by the window, staring down at the bustling streets, envying the people who walked freely, holding coffee cups and laughing with friends. They seemed more alive than she ever felt in her golden cage. The truth was, Liam loved appearances more than people. He loved the way photographers followed them into black tie events, the way magazines wrote about his perfect life. Chloe was part of that image, until she wasn't. Once Jasmine entered the picture, Chloe became invisible in her own home. The night of the gala wasn't just a public humiliation. It was a brutal reminder that she had been replaced long before the announcement. Jasmine was already taking her spot in Liam's world. The penthouse that was once Chloe's refuge now felt like a stranger's house. Every polished surface reminded her that she was disposable. Chloe looked around at the cold perfection of her surroundings and made a quiet vow. She would not raise her child in a palace built on betrayal. She would leave this glittering prison behind, even if it meant starting over with nothing, because sometimes freedom is worth more than all the diamonds in Sydney. Liam O'Connell was not always the bloke who humiliated his wife in front of 100 people. Once, he had been charming, persuasive, the kind of man who could convince anyone that the impossible was within reach. That's how he built his empire, through confidence, ambition, and a ruthless refusal to accept failure. But as the years went on, that drive hardened into arrogance. Liam stopped seeing people as human beings and started seeing them as tools, stepping stones toward greater power. With Chloe, it started subtly. At first, he encouraged her dreams, listening as she spoke about her design projects, even visiting one of her completed apartments. But as his own empire grew, he stopped pretending. He called her work small compared to his billion-dollar deals. He told her to leave the business world to men like him. To the outside world, he was a doting husband. But behind closed doors, his words sliced deeper than any knife. Into this void stepped Jasmine Reed. She was young, beautiful, and above all, ambitious. Unlike Chloe, she didn't talk about homes filled with warmth or the beauty of a hand-painted nursery. Jasmine talked about power, media coverage, brand positioning. She understood Liam's hunger and fed it like fire. Every compliment she gave him was calculated, every smile rehearsed, every touch designed to convince him that she was the partner he truly deserved. Jasmine was clever enough never to openly disrespect Chloe, at least not at first. She played innocent, claiming she only wanted to support Liam's vision. But behind Chloe's back, she worked tirelessly to erase her. She made sure Liam's schedule was packed so he would miss doctor's appointments. She whispered doubts into his ear, suggesting that Chloe didn't fit the image of a CEO's wife. And slowly, Liam began to believe her. He started coming home later and later, the scent of expensive perfume lingering on his suits. He dismissed Chloe's questions with irritation, telling her she was paranoid, hormonal, imagining things. He made her doubt her own gut feeling. That was his power, not just to betray, but to make her feel like she was the problem. By the time the gala rolled around, Liam was no longer the man Chloe married. He had become someone else entirely, A man so consumed by ego that he could stand in front of a room full of witnesses and discard his pregnant wife like an unwanted accessory. Jasmine didn't need to say a word. She stood there, radiant and triumphant, letting Liam do the dirty work for her. To him, Chloe had become invisible. To Jasmine, Chloe was already defeated. But both underestimated one thing. Beneath Chloe's quiet demeanor was a strength neither of them had ever imagined. Because the woman they thought they had destroyed was about to write a new chapter of her life, one where Liam's arrogance and Jasmine's manipulation would finally come crashing down. And when the empire they built on betrayal began to crumble, Chloe would be the one still standing tall. The gala should have been Chloe's proudest moment. She had dressed with care, choosing a flowing midnight blue gown that skimmed over her growing belly. She hoped Liam would glance at her and remember the love they once shared, the life they were about to bring into the world. Instead, she became the centerpiece of his betrayal. When Liam pulled Jasmine onto the stage, Chloe froze. The applause was uneven, awkward, filled with the uncomfortable shuffling of people unsure if they should clap. Cameras flashed, capturing Jasmine's triumphant smile and Liam's confident grip on her hand. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. Her ears buzzed, drowning out the music, the chatter, the laughter. All she heard was the shattering of her own heart. Around her, whispers spread like wildfire. "Isn't his wife right there?" one woman whispered, eyes darting toward Chloe. "She's pregnant," another hissed, covering her mouth in shock. Men shook their heads. Women exchanged pitying glances. Chloe wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. She turned slowly, her movements deliberate, as though one wrong step would make her collapse. Her hand instinctively cradled her belly, shielding her child from the cruelty of the world. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply walked out, each step echoing against the marble floor, heavy with shame. Behind her, Liam never called her name. Jasmine never flinched. The betrayal was complete. Outside, the cold Sydney night wrapped around her like a punishment. Chloe clutched her small purse, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to cry where strangers could see. She staggered to the curb, heels wobbling, as the city lights smeared into golden streaks through her tears. She hailed a cab with a trembling hand. The driver glanced at her pale face and asked gently, "You all right, love?" She nodded quickly, forcing her voice steady. "Newtown," she whispered. That was all. In the back seat, the silence finally broke her. Tears spilled freely, soaking her dress. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the city rush past. Every billboard, every skyscraper, reminded her of the man who had just destroyed her. She thought of the nursery she had painted with such care, of the journal filled with letters to her unborn baby. She had dreamed of telling her child about a strong father who would protect them both. Now, that dream lay shattered. Chloe wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly, whispering to the life inside her. "I'll protect you. I don't know how yet, but I will. You deserve better than this." Her voice cracked, but a fierce determination flickered through her despair. The cab stopped in front of a modest apartment building in Newtown, a long way from the glittering towers of the city. Chloe paid the driver with shaking hands and stepped out into the night. The gown that once made her feel beautiful now clung, damp and heavy with tears. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done being invisible. And from the ashes of this humiliation, a new Chloe was about to rise. The first nights in Newtown were the hardest. Chloe traded marble floors and city views for peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of mildew seeping through the cracks of a tiny rented flat. The place was small, one bedroom with a creaky bed and a single lamp that flickered whenever she turned it on. It was the complete opposite of the glamorous penthouse she had just left behind. Yet for the first time in years, she felt something close to control, though it was buried under layers of fear and loneliness. She kept the curtains closed, afraid someone might recognize her. Liam's world was everywhere. Newspapers, magazines, TV screens in the local cafe blaring about his latest business deal. She avoided them all. She didn't want to see his face, didn't want to hear his name. The silence pressed down on her. Nights were the worst. She would sit on the edge of the bed, hands cradling her belly, whispering to her unborn child, because there was no one else to listen. "It's just us now," she murmured. Her voice shook. "I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I promise I'll try." Food lost its taste. She picked at simple meals, toast, canned soup, tea gone cold, forcing herself to eat because the baby needed her to. She skipped her prenatal vitamins more than once, too overwhelmed to keep track. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked like a stranger. Pale skin, red-rimmed eyes, hair unbrushed. She used to glow at galas, her smile polished and perfect. Now she was just another tired woman trying to hold herself together in a city that didn't care. The weight of betrayal pressed on her chest, heavier than the growing baby inside. She replayed that night at the gala over and over until it haunted her dreams. Jasmine's triumphant smile, Liam's hand gripping another woman, while she stood forgotten. The humiliation burned so deeply it left her trembling whenever she thought about it. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Anger. It came quietly at first, like a whisper. She remembered the years she had given Liam, the sacrifices she made, the love she poured into a man who tossed her aside. She remembered the nursery she painted, the journal she filled with promises, and she realized he had taken so much, but he hadn't taken everything. She still had her child. One evening, Chloe forced herself to open the journal again. Her hands shook as she wrote, but the words poured out like medicine. "You are the reason I will keep fighting. No matter what he did to us, we are not broken. We will rise again." It wasn't strength yet, not fully, but it was a start. In the shadows of that small apartment, Chloe was collapsing piece by piece. Yet in the cracks of her despair, the first seeds of resilience were quietly taking root. And soon, fate would send someone into her life who would change everything. On her third week in Newtown, Chloe forced herself out of the apartment for a doctor's appointment. She had avoided it for too long, afraid of being recognized, but the baby's health couldn't wait. Pulling on a loose jumper and tying her hair back into a messy bun, she hoped she looked like just another tired woman in the city. The waiting room buzzed with quiet conversations, mothers flipping through magazines, children squirming in their seats. Chloe sat hunched in the corner, her hands folded over her stomach, praying no one would notice her. When the receptionist called her name, she stood quickly, keeping her eyes low as she followed into the hallway. That was when she heard a familiar voice. "Chloe? Chloe Davies?" Her heart lurched. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing just a few feet away was Dylan Carter. It had been years since she'd last seen him, back when he was just a determined law student with big dreams of defending the vulnerable. Now he wore a tailored suit, his presence confident but warm, his eyes widening with recognition and shock. For a moment, Chloe considered denying it, pretending she wasn't who he thought she was. But Dylan stepped closer, concern softening his features. "It really is you. My God, it's been so long." She forced a small smile, but her voice cracked. Dylan, didn't expect to see you here. I'm consulting on a patient's legal case, he explained quickly. Then his gaze dropped to her belly, and his expression shifted. Surprise, then worry. Chloe, you're pregnant. Her throat tightened. Shame flooded her, as though she had to explain why she was standing there alone, hiding in a small clinic when her husband was one of the most powerful blokes in Sydney. She tried to brush it off. It's complicated. Dylan didn't press. He simply said, Then let's sit down. Tell me what happened. And for the first time since that humiliating night, Chloe allowed herself to speak. The words tumbled out, shaky at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. She told him about Liam, the gala, Jasmine, the cold silence of the penthouse, the lonely flat in Newtown. Tears welled, but Dylan didn't look at her with pity. He listened, his jaw tightening, his hands clenching at the betrayal she described. When she finished, silence hung between them. Then Dylan leaned forward, his voice steady. You are not alone anymore. Do you hear me? Whatever he did, whatever he took from you, you're not gonna face this by yourself. Chloe's breath caught. For weeks, she had lived in shadows, convinced she had no one left. Now, sitting across from an old friend who had grown into a man of principle, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. It wasn't love. It wasn't a rescue. But it was a hand reaching into the darkness, pulling her back from the edge. And Chloe didn't know it yet. But Dylan's return was only the first step toward a powerful transformation that would shake Liam's world. While Chloe was trying to rebuild her strength in silence, Liam O'Connell was busy showcasing his new life with Jasmine Reed. Their photographs filled society columns, the powerful CEO and his dazzling companion, smiling at charity galas, arriving arm in arm at exclusive restaurants. To the world, it looked like Liam had upgraded, but beneath the glossy surface of his empire, cracks had already begun to form. Jasmine had what Liam craved: youth, beauty, and a sharp understanding of image. But what she truly hungered for was control. She played her role carefully, whispering strategies that flattered his ego while quietly weaving herself deeper into his business. The press adores us, Liam, she would purr, scrolling through glowing headlines. Together, we look unstoppable. But Jasmine's loyalty was never to Liam. It was to herself. Every calculated smile was designed to position her as indispensable, the woman behind the throne. When Liam dismissed his long-trusted advisors because Jasmine claimed they were out of touch, she celebrated in silence. The fewer loyalists around him, the easier he was to manipulate. Liam, blinded by vanity, didn't notice how dangerous her influence had become. He pushed for riskier deals, chasing headlines instead of stability. He ignored warning signs from the board, silencing anyone who questioned him. The empire he had built on discipline and calculation was now running on reckless ambition. Behind the closed doors of their penthouse, Jasmine's sweetness sometimes cracked. She would grow cold, demanding more attention, more gifts, more proof of her worth. Liam, terrified of losing the image he had flaunted to the world, bent to her demands. He had chosen her publicly. He couldn't back down without looking weak. But his employees weren't blind. Whispers began to circulate in the office. He's distracted, some muttered. She's pulling the strings, others said. Productivity dropped. Deals started falling apart. Rival companies saw an opening, circling like sharks around the wounded empire. Liam told himself he was still in control. He strutted through the halls, barking orders, ignoring the sideways glances. But deep down, he felt it. The unease of a man standing on quicksand. His arrogance had cost him the loyalty of his wife, the respect of his staff, and soon it would cost him much more. Meanwhile, Jasmine began meeting secretly with investors, presenting herself as the true visionary of O'Connell Global. She spoke softly, always smiling, but her message was clear. Liam was losing his edge, and she was the future. The trap was being set, and Liam was walking right into it. For Chloe, tucked away in Newtown, this shift in power remained invisible, for now. But fate had a way of weaving stories together. The empire that had humiliated her was beginning to tremble. And soon, the cracks in Liam's kingdom would collide with the new strength growing inside her. Because the higher Liam climbed with Jasmine by his side, the harder his fall would be when the truth finally came crashing down. Life in Newtown was nothing like the glossy world Chloe had once lived in. Gone were the private drivers, the designer gowns, and the penthouse view. In their place were squeaky train rides, second-hand clothes, and nights spent counting the dollars in her wallet to make sure she had enough for groceries. It was humbling, terrifying, and strangely liberating all at once. Each morning, she forced herself out of bed, even when the weight of exhaustion pressed heavily on her body. The pregnancy made everything harder. Simple tasks, climbing the stairs, carrying bags, even tying her shoes, felt like battles. But Chloe pushed through, reminding herself with every movement that she wasn't just surviving for herself anymore. She was fighting for the tiny heartbeat growing inside her. She found part-time work at a small neighborhood furniture store. The pay was tiny, but the owner, a kind elderly man named Mr. Rosen, gave her flexible hours and never asked questions she didn't want to answer. "You've got an eye for design," he said one afternoon, watching her rearrange a display of lamps and chairs. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words lit a small spark inside her. For so long, Liam had dismissed her passion, belittling her career. But here, in this modest little shop, she was reminded that her skills mattered. Customers often lingered over her arrangements, complimenting her taste. It wasn't much, but it was something. A thread of identity she could cling to as she pieced together the ruins of her life. Still, the nights were heavy. Loneliness crept into her flat like a shadow. She would curl up on the worn couch, her hands on her belly, whispering to the baby, "We're going to be okay." Some nights, she believed it. Other nights, her voice cracked with doubt. Dylan checked in often. He brought groceries when he could, reminded her about appointments, and gently urged her to take legal action against Liam. But Chloe wasn't ready for that yet. Her wounds were still raw. The thought of facing Liam in a courtroom made her chest tighten with fear. And then, one rainy afternoon, a moment came that changed something inside her. She was rearranging a window display at the store when a young couple stopped to watch. They smiled, admiring her work. The woman turned to her and said, "This looks beautiful. Do you design interiors professionally?" Chloe froze. It had been months since anyone asked her that. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, I used to." "Well," the woman said warmly, "you shouldn't stop. You clearly have a gift." Those simple words sank deep into Chloe's heart. For the first time since the night of the gala, she felt a flicker of confidence. Fragile, but real. Maybe she wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe her story wasn't over. She stepped back from the display, her reflection faint in the glass, her belly visible beneath her jumper. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she and her baby were not just surviving, but thriving. And Chloe had no idea that her fragile new strength was about to collide with a destiny far greater than she ever imagined. Nights in Newtown had a way of pulling Chloe backward. The quiet was too heavy, too sharp, leaving her alone with memories she wished she could bury. She would sit on the edge of her narrow bed, the hum of traffic outside her window, and close her eyes. And every time, the past came rushing back. She remembered the first time she met Liam. It was at a gallery in Surrey Hills, a place she had gone with a client who wanted her advice on a warehouse renovation. Liam had been magnetic from the moment she saw him. Tall, impeccably dressed, his confidence filling the room like an electric current. When their eyes met, he smiled in a way that made her feel like the only woman in the world. He pursued her relentlessly. Expensive dinners, spontaneous weekend trips up the coast, bouquets of roses so large they barely fit through the door of her tiny flat. For Chloe, who had grown up watching her mum sacrifice everything just to pay the bills, it felt like stepping into a dream. She had never been spoiled before. She had never been adored like that. She told herself it was love. For a while it was. There were nights when Liam held her close, whispering promises about the future. There were mornings when he surprised her with coffee, just the way she liked it, when they laughed over burnt pancakes in their first shared kitchen. She wanted to believe those moments were real, that they would last forever. But as the years went on, the tenderness faded. The roses stopped arriving. The laughter at breakfast turned into silence at separate ends of the table. When she spoke about her design projects, he barely looked up from his phone. His empire consumed him, and Chloe became background noise. She tried harder, new recipes, new dresses, new ways to keep his attention, but nothing worked. Slowly, she began to feel invisible. When she discovered she was pregnant, her heart leapt with hope. She thought this would change everything, that Liam would remember the man he used to be. She imagined him holding their child, imagined late nights where they would take turns rocking the baby to sleep. She believed this baby would heal the distance between them. But Liam's eyes never lit up when she told him the news. He offered a thin smile, a distracted, "That's good," before returning to his emails. From that moment, she carried the weight of joy and disappointment all at once. She told herself it was just stress, that once the baby arrived, things would be different. Now, sitting in her modest apartment, those memories pierced her like glass. The man who once promised her forever had humiliated her in front of the world. The dream she clung to had turned into a nightmare. Chloe pressed her hands against her belly, whispering through tears, "I thought love was enough. I was wrong." But what she didn't know yet was that her story wasn't about the love she lost. It was about the new strength she was about to discover. While Chloe struggled quietly in Newtown, Liam O'Connell's kingdom began to tremble. On the surface, he was still the powerful CEO striding through glass towers, but behind the closed doors of O'Connell Global, the whispers were growing louder. Deals that once came easily now stalled. Investors questioned his judgment. Rival companies circled like predators sensing blood. Liam brushed it all off as jealousy. "They envy me," he told Jasmine, with a smug grin, as they lounged in the penthouse. But Jasmine wasn't smiling. She had grown restless. For months, she had played the perfect partner, smiling for cameras, whispering strategies, making him believe he was untouchable. But now, the cracks in his empire were too obvious to ignore. She began to pull away. Where she once clung to his arm, she now checked her phone during their dinners. Where she once praised his brilliance, she now sighed impatiently, reminding him of the risks he had ignored. "You should have listened to me," she snapped one night after another deal collapsed. "You're slipping, Liam. People are laughing at you." Her words cut deeper than she knew. Liam thrived on respect, on fear, on the illusion of control. The thought of anyone laughing at him was unbearable, but instead of admitting his mistakes, he grew harsher, barking orders at his staff, firing loyal executives, and replacing them with people too weak to challenge him. And Jasmine noticed. She began attending secret dinners with investors, sliding into conversations where she painted herself as the future. "Liam has vision," she would say sweetly, "but vision means nothing without strategy. That's where I come in." Her eyes sparkled, her charm undeniable. Slowly, those investors began listening to her more than to him. Meanwhile, the media began sniffing around. Rumors of reckless decisions and financial missteps leaked into tabloids. Once hailed as a genius, Liam was now painted as unstable, impulsive, blinded by his obsession with his mistress. He slammed newspapers on his desk, furious. But no matter how hard he tried, the narrative slipped from his control. At home, the tension thickened. Jasmine no longer pretended to be the adoring partner. She wanted more money, more influence, more recognition. When Liam tried to remind her of her place, she laughed coldly. "Your place is disappearing, Liam. Without me, you're finished." For the first time, a sharp fear gnawed at him. He had built his empire on arrogance, convinced he could never fall. But Jasmine was not Chloe. She would not stand silently by his side. She was ambitious, ruthless, and she smelled weakness. Liam poured another glass of scotch, staring out at the glittering skyline that once felt like his kingdom. The city hadn't changed, but he had. He was no longer the man in control. He was a man coming undone, and Jasmine was tightening the strings. And while Liam tried desperately to hold his empire together, he had no idea that Chloe, the wife he discarded, was slowly finding her strength, ready to rise from the shadows he left her in. Dylan Carter had always trusted his gut, and his gut told him Liam O'Connell's empire was built on more than just ambition. Every time Chloe described Liam's behavior, the arrogance, the secrecy, the late-night calls, Dylan felt there was more beneath the surface. And now, as a lawyer who specialized in protecting the vulnerable, he had the skills to dig. He didn't tell Chloe at first. She was still fragile, balancing her pregnancy with the daily struggle of survival. But Dylan knew that if Liam truly was as reckless as he suspected, the truth could become Chloe's shield. So he began quietly making calls, pulling favors from old contacts in the financial district, scanning through public filings late into the night. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. On paper, O'Connell Global looked polished, but Dylan noticed unusual patterns: shell companies, offshore accounts, and transactions timed suspiciously close to Liam's public announcements. To most people, it was just noise, but to Dylan, it screamed manipulation. The breakthrough came when an old college friend, now working as an analyst, slipped him a confidential report. "I probably shouldn't be showing you this, mate," the man whispered over coffee. "But your gut is right. O'Connell's been inflating numbers, hiding losses, and funneling money through fake subsidiaries. If this goes public, he's finished." Dylan's pulse quickened as he studied the report. This wasn't just a mistake. It was fraud. If exposed, Liam wouldn't just lose his empire. He could face time in the clink. But the evidence was more than just financial wrongdoing. Hidden within the files were documents tying Jasmine to the schemes. She wasn't just his mistress. She was his partner in crime. Her carefully crafted image as a supportive advisor was nothing but a disguise for her hunger for power. Dylan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He now held the key to Liam's destruction. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Chloe had been discarded, humiliated, erased from her own life. This evidence could restore her dignity and protect the future of her child. The question was timing. If he revealed it too soon, Liam might bury it with his influence. If he waited too long, Jasmine might tighten her grip and escape without a scratch. Dylan needed to be careful. That night, he visited Chloe's flat. She was sitting on the couch, rubbing her belly, her face tired but calm. He didn't show her the files yet. Instead, he simply said, "Chloe, I need you to trust me. I've found something. Something that could change everything for you and your baby." Her eyes widened with both fear and hope. Change everything how? Dylan hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on hers. Let's just say, Liam isn't as untouchable as he wants the world to believe. For the first time, Chloe saw a glimmer of justice ahead. The man who had broken her might finally face the consequences of his cruelty. And though she didn't know it yet, the golden evidence Dylan held would soon turn Liam's empire into ashes. For weeks, Chloe had lived as if she were invisible, hiding in the shadows, shrinking from the world, too broken to imagine a future. But the night Dylan spoke to her about Liam's corruption, something shifted deep inside her. For the first time since the betrayal, she realized she wasn't powerless. She had something Liam never expected her to find: the truth. The next morning, she stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bathroom. Her reflection startled her. Pale skin, tired eyes, messy hair. She barely recognized the woman staring back. For months, she had seen weakness, but now she saw possibility. She touched her belly gently, whispering, "We deserve better, and I'm going to make sure we get it." Chloe began rebuilding herself piece by piece. She started with small changes, brushing her hair every morning, putting on clean clothes that made her feel more like herself, keeping a journal of her goals. She forced herself to eat properly, to take her vitamins, to walk around the block, even when exhaustion threatened to keep her in bed. Each step, however small, was an act of defiance against the despair that had consumed her. Dylan became her ally in more ways than one. He pushed her not just legally, but emotionally. "You are stronger than you think," he reminded her often. "Don't let him write the end of your story." His words sank into her like seeds, slowly blooming into courage. Chloe also returned to her craft. At the furniture store, she offered design advice to customers, sketching layouts on scraps of paper. One couple was so impressed, they hired her to decorate their small flat. It wasn't glamorous, but when she finished the project and saw the joy on their faces, Chloe felt something she hadn't felt in months: pride. She was still capable. She was still talented. She was more than the wife Liam had discarded. Day by day, the victim in her began to fade, replaced by a woman with fire in her eyes. She no longer avoided mirrors. She no longer whispered apologies to her unborn child. Instead, she made promises. "I will show you that your mum didn't give up. I will show you what strength looks like." Then came the decision. Dylan laid the evidence on her kitchen table, page after page of corruption, fraud, and betrayal. Chloe studied it carefully, her hands trembling not from fear, but from determination. She realized this was her chance, not just to free herself from Liam's shadow, but to stand tall before the world that had watched her humiliation. She looked at Dylan, her voice firm. "I want to fight, not just for me, for my baby, for the woman he thought he could destroy." For the first time since the night of the gala, Chloe's back was straight, her chin lifted, her eyes alive with fire. She was no longer the discarded wife. She was a fighter preparing for battle, and Liam had no idea that the woman he erased was coming back stronger than ever. The boardroom of O'Connell Global was a fortress of glass and steel, perched high above Sydney's financial district. On that morning, executives gathered around the massive mahogany table, whispering nervously as Liam stormed in, his jaw tight, his suit immaculate. He was furious. Rumors about his failing deals had leaked again, and investors were demanding answers. He slammed a folder on the table. "We're not here to panic," he barked. "We're here to remind the world who controls this market." But before he could launch into his speech, the doors opened. Every head turned. Silence fell. Chloe Davies stepped inside. She no longer looked like the fragile woman who had fled the gala weeks earlier. Her hair was styled neatly, her clothes sharp but modest, her posture straight. She carried herself with a calm strength, one hand resting lightly on her belly. Her eyes locked on Liam's, steady and unflinching. For the first time in years, Liam was speechless. "Chloe," he muttered, his voice low, as if saying her name might break the spell. The executives looked at one another in confusion. Jasmine, seated near Liam, stiffened in her chair. She hadn't expected this. Her painted smile faltered as Chloe walked forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "I'm not here to cause a scene," Chloe said evenly, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm here because I have something to say, and I suggest you all listen." She set a folder on the table, Dylan's evidence neatly compiled. The room shifted with murmurs as the executives glanced at one another. Liam's face drained of color. "What is this?" he demanded. "The truth," Chloe replied. "The truth about your offshore accounts. The truth about your fraudulent reports. The truth about the empire you built on lies." She looked around the room, her voice steady. "And the truth about how you discarded your wife and unborn child while you paraded your mistress in public." Gasps filled the air. Jasmine tried to interrupt, but Chloe turned her gaze on her, sharp as glass. "You've played your part well, Jasmine, but the board deserves to know how deeply you're tied to his corruption. You weren't just his public partner, you were his partner in crime." Jasmine's face flushed red, her mask slipping. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Some began flipping through the documents Chloe had laid out, their eyes widening as they scanned the damning evidence. Liam's fists clenched. "You think you can walk in here and—" "Yes," Chloe cut him off firmly. "I can, because you underestimated me. You thought I would disappear. You thought humiliation would silence me, but you forgot who I am." She placed her hand on her belly. "I am a mother now, and I will not let my child's legacy be defined by your lies." The silence that followed was deafening. For once, Liam had no words, and in that moment, every person in that room realized Chloe Davies was no longer the broken wife. She was the storm that could bring Liam O'Connell to his knees. The boardroom erupted. Papers shuffled, voices rose, and the tension was electric as executives pored over the evidence Chloe had placed before them. Liam's face turned crimson. His carefully constructed image of control was slipping with every passing second. "This is nonsense," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Fabricated lies meant to discredit me. She's bitter. She'll say anything." His eyes burned into Chloe's, but she didn't flinch. "Really?" Chloe's voice was calm, steady. She pointed to a page in the documents. "These wire transfers were made to shell companies that don't exist. They trace back to offshore accounts in the Caymans. Your signature is on the authorization line. Explain that, Liam." The room fell silent. All eyes shifted to him. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For weeks, she had been maneuvering behind the scenes, but now the spotlight was too hot. She licked her lips, her confidence wavering. An executive turned to her. "Miss Reed, your name appears here as well. Care to clarify your role in these transactions?" The mask finally cracked. Jasmine straightened, her tone icy. "I did what I was told. Every move I made was at Liam's direction. If there was fraud, it was his, not mine." Liam's head whipped toward her, fury flashing in his eyes. "You liar," he hissed. But Jasmine didn't stop. She leaned forward, addressing the board with a perfect blend of indignation and self-preservation. "I warned him. I told him these tactics were reckless. He refused to listen. I only followed orders because I was pressured. I have nothing to hide." The betrayal sliced through Liam like a blade. His mistress, the woman he had humiliated his wife for, was abandoning him in front of his empire. He tried to regain control, but the room was already turning against him. One board member cleared his throat. "If this evidence holds, we could face federal investigation. Shareholders will demand answers. We cannot allow the company to collapse with him at the helm." Another executive nodded grimly. "It may be time to consider a removal." Liam's voice rose, desperate now. "You fools think you can run this without me? I built this empire. None of you would be here without me." Chloe stood tall, her voice cutting through his rage. "You built it on lies, Liam, and lies always collapse." The boardroom doors opened suddenly, and reporters' voices echoed down the hall. Word had already spread. Someone had leaked the documents. Cameras flashed outside, journalists shouting Liam's name. Panic rippled through the room. Jasmine calmly gathered her purse, her smile sharp. "Good luck explaining yourself," she whispered to Liam, before sweeping out the door, leaving him alone with the wreckage. Liam sank into his chair, his face pale. For the first time in his career, he wasn't the predator. He was the prey. And as the empire he once ruled began to crumble, Chloe walked out with her head held high, no longer the woman he broke, but the woman who broke him. The fallout was immediate. By the time Liam left the boardroom, the media storm was in full swing. Reporters swarmed the building, microphones thrust in his face, cameras flashing like lightning. "Mr. O'Connell, is it true you falsified financial records? Did you pressure Jasmine Reed into participating in fraud? Where is your wife?" Liam shoved past them, rage boiling under his skin. He stormed into his penthouse hours later, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. The man who once strutted with untouchable confidence now looked like a cornered predator. Jasmine was waiting, a glass of wine in hand, lounging on the velvet sofa as if nothing had changed. "You embarrassed me," Liam growled, slamming the door shut. "You threw me under the bus in front of the board." Jasmine's smile was cool, detached. "I saved myself. You were sinking, Liam, and I refused to go down with you." His jaw clenched. "After everything I gave you, after I risked everything for you." Jasmine stood slowly, setting her glass on the table. "Let's be honest, you didn't risk anything for me. You used me, I used you. That's how this works. But now the game has changed, and you're not the winner anymore." He stepped closer, fury in his eyes. "You think you can survive this without me?" Her laugh was sharp, mocking. "I don't just think it, I know it. The investors are already speaking to me. They see me as the future. You're finished." The words landed like daggers. Liam's empire, his reputation, his pride, it was all slipping away, and the woman he had chosen over his wife was now driving the final nail into his coffin. He reached for her arm, but Jasmine yanked it back, her eyes flashing with disdain. "Don't ever touch me again," she snapped. "You're desperate, and it's pathetic. I wanted power, Liam, not a broken man scrambling to hold on to what's left of his crown." With that, she grabbed her coat and her designer bag, striding toward the door. Liam's voice cracked as he shouted after her, "Jasmine, you can't walk away from me!" But she didn't even glance back. The door slammed shut, the echo reverberating through the empty penthouse. For the first time, silence terrified him. He looked around at the lavish apartment, the marble counters, the gold accents, the endless view of Sydney. None of it mattered anymore. He had wealth, but no respect. Power, but no allies. A kingdom, but no queen. The irony twisted like a knife. He had destroyed Chloe, the woman who had loved him without condition, only to be abandoned by Jasmine, the woman who loved nothing but ambition. Liam sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Everything he once controlled was slipping through his fingers. And as Jasmine vanished from his life for good, Liam was left with the bitter truth. He had lost everything, and the woman he once discarded was the only one still standing. It was late at night when the first sharp pain hit Chloe. She had been sitting at her small kitchen table, sketching designs for a client's apartment, when her hand suddenly froze around her pencil. A wave of pain surged through her body, so strong she nearly doubled over. She clutched the edge of the table, breathing heavily, her heart racing. The contractions came faster than she expected. Panic flickered in her chest. She wasn't ready, not mentally, not emotionally. She staggered to the phone and dialed Dylan's number with trembling fingers. "Dylan," she gasped, her voice breaking. "It's happening. The baby, please. I need help." Within minutes, Dylan was at her door, his face pale but determined. He wrapped an arm around her, steadying her as another contraction tore through her. "I've got you, Chloe. You're not doing this alone." The cab ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and fear. Chloe gripped Dylan's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Sweat poured down her face, tears mixing with whispered pleas. "Please let my baby be safe," she repeated over and over, as if the universe might hear her. At the hospital, nurses rushed her into a delivery room. Bright lights, beeping machines, voices calling out instructions. It all spun together in a haze. Chloe lay back, exhausted, her body racked with waves of agony. She felt small, fragile, overwhelmed, but every time her strength wavered, Dylan was there. He stood by her side, holding her hand, whispering steady words into her ear. "Breathe, Chloe. You're stronger than this pain. You're stronger than him. Look at me. You can do this." His voice anchored her. She thought of Liam for a fleeting moment, how he had once promised to be there, how he had abandoned her long before this night. But then she looked at Dylan, steady and unwavering, and realized she was no longer defined by abandonment. Hours dragged on. Each contraction was a battle, each push a war cry. Chloe screamed, cried, begged for it to end, but she kept going, driven by the fierce love for the life inside her. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cry of a newborn filled the room. The sound broke her. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed the tiny baby in her arms. A girl, small, perfect, pink, her cries fierce and alive. Chloe's chest heaved as she stared down at her daughter, overwhelmed with relief and awe. "She's beautiful," Dylan whispered, his own eyes glistening. Chloe held the baby close, her heart swelling with a love she didn't know she still had the capacity for. "You're safe now," she whispered through her tears. "I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you." For the first time since her world had collapsed, Chloe felt whole again. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, all of it faded in the presence of this fragile miracle. And as she cradled her daughter, Chloe realized that this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one, brighter than she ever imagined. While Chloe held her newborn daughter in the quiet of a Sydney hospital room, another scene unfolded across the city, a scene Liam O'Connell could no longer control. The evidence Dylan uncovered had reached the press, and overnight, headlines screamed with scandal. O'Connell global fraud exposed. CEO Liam O'Connell under investigation. Mistress tied to embezzlement scheme. The same cameras that once adored Liam now stalked him with ruthless hunger. Reporters camped outside his penthouse, demanding answers. Former allies vanished, their silence louder than any accusation. Investors pulled out, stocks plummeted, and the once proud empire cracked under the weight of truth. Liam stormed into his office, barking orders, but his authority was gone. His executives avoided his gaze. Some had already resigned. Others whispered in corners, waiting for the inevitable. When federal agents walked through the lobby with subpoenas in hand, the building itself seemed to exhale, as though relieved his reign of fear was ending. Jasmine, of course, was nowhere to be found. She had already leaked carefully worded statements to the press, painting herself as a victim, a woman misled by a ruthless man. Her betrayal was complete. Her hands washed clean in public, leaving Liam to bear the full weight of the scandal. At a hastily arranged press conference, Liam attempted to salvage his image. He stood before flashing cameras, his voice shaky as he denied every accusation. "I am innocent. These are lies spread by bitter enemies and a vindictive ex-wife." But the crowd wasn't buying it. Reporters shouted over one another, waving copies of leaked documents. One voice rose above the chaos. "Mr. O'Connell, is it true your mistress has testified against you?" The question struck like a bullet. Liam froze, his composure shattering. Cameras captured every twitch, every bead of sweat, every flicker of fear. That image, once powerful CEO reduced to a desperate man, spread across every screen in Australia. Meanwhile, Dylan watched from Chloe's hospital room, the baby sleeping soundly in her arms. He turned down the volume on the TV and smiled softly. "It's happening, Chloe. Justice is finally here." Chloe looked at the screen briefly, her heart steady. Once, the sight of Liam would have torn her apart. But now, holding her daughter, she felt nothing but closure. It was no longer her world. He was just a man, undone by his own greed. Within weeks, federal charges were filed: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Liam's bail was set at an astronomical figure, and even then, no one came to his aid. His assets were frozen, his penthouse seized, his reputation destroyed. For years he had believed he was untouchable, but in the end, he was brought down not by competitors or rivals, but by the woman he underestimated most. And as Liam faced the collapse of everything he'd built, Chloe stepped quietly into her new life, free at last from his shadow. The weeks after her daughter's birth were both exhausting and beautiful. Chloe's small apartment echoed with midnight cries, soft lullabies, and the steady rhythm of survival. Sleep was scarce, meals were rushed, but every time she looked at her baby's tiny face, she felt a warmth that made the sacrifices worth it. For the first time in months, her tears were not of pain, but of gratitude. She named her daughter Grace, a name that carried both strength and serenity. "You're my Grace," she whispered often, holding the baby close. "You saved me." Dylan remained by her side, helping where he could, bringing groceries, making sure Chloe never missed a doctor's appointment. But one evening, he introduced her to someone new. "Chloe," Dylan said gently, "there's someone I'd like you to meet. He can help you, not just legally, but in building a future." Chloe hesitated. She wasn't ready for strangers, not after everything she had endured. But when Julian Scott walked into the room, something about his presence felt different. Julian was not flashy like Liam. Though he was a tech billionaire, his demeanor was calm, grounded. His eyes carried a quiet kindness, the kind born from someone who had known both success and heartbreak. He greeted Chloe with a warm handshake, his gaze respectful, never lingering on her scars or her vulnerability. "I've heard a lot about you," he said softly, "and about the courage it took to stand up for yourself." Chloe felt a flicker of discomfort. She wasn't used to being praised anymore, but Julian's words didn't feel patronizing. They felt genuine. Over the next few weeks, Julian visited often. At first, it was under the guise of business. He admired Chloe's eye for design and offered her small projects to test her skills. "My office needs warmth," he admitted with a chuckle. "Technology doesn't make a place feel like home. People like you do." Chloe was cautious, but when she worked, she felt alive again. Sketching, choosing colors, arranging spaces. It reminded her of who she was before Liam tried to erase her. Julian paid her fairly, respected her opinions, and encouraged her to trust her instincts again. But it wasn't just business. Julian took time to talk with her, to listen. He asked about Grace, about her childhood, about her dreams beyond survival. He never pushed, never demanded. Instead, he gave her space to heal at her own pace. One afternoon, as Chloe watched Julian gently cradle Grace in his arms, she felt an unfamiliar sensation. Hope. For so long, men in her life had been sources of pain or disappointment, but here was someone different. Someone who valued her not for appearances, not for what she could give him, but for who she was. Chloe wasn't ready to call it love, not yet, but she was ready to admit something she never thought possible. Her heart was no longer broken beyond repair, and with Grace in her arms and Julian by her side, Chloe realized that healing wasn't just about surviving. It was about opening herself to happiness again. Months passed, and Chloe's life slowly transformed. The woman who once hid in a cramped apartment, broken and humiliated, was no longer there. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid. With Grace in her arms and a small but growing design business supported by Julian, she had rebuilt herself from the ashes. Julian's presence became more than professional. He was patient, never rushing her, never demanding more than she could give. He helped her laugh again, reminded her that love didn't have to be painful or manipulative. Where Liam once belittled her dreams, Julian encouraged them. Where Liam abandoned her in her most vulnerable moment, Julian showed up without hesitation. Whether it was late-night feedings, business advice, or quiet evenings spent watching Grace sleep. One evening, standing on the terrace of Julian's home overlooking the harbor, Chloe felt a sense of peace she had never known. Julian wrapped a gentle arm around her shoulders. "You've come so far," he said softly. "You should be proud." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You did it because you're stronger than you ever believed. I just reminded you of it." Their eyes met, and for the first time since her marriage collapsed, Chloe didn't look away. She let the warmth of his gaze settle into her, and she knew she was ready. Ready for a love that was real, steady, and safe. Meanwhile, across the city, Liam O'Connell faced a very different fate. His trial dominated headlines. Federal prosecutors tore through the evidence, and one by one, his former allies turned against him. Jasmine testified in court, cool and composed, painting Liam as the mastermind, while she posed as the manipulated pawn. The jury didn't believe his desperate denials. The once mighty CEO was sentenced to years in prison. His penthouse was sold, his company dismantled, his name synonymous with disgrace. Reporters captured him being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and regret. But there was no one left to defend him. No allies, no mistress, no wife. He had destroyed them all, and now he was utterly alone. Chloe never attended the trial. She didn't need to. Watching his downfall wasn't her victory. It was simply justice taking its course. Her victory was holding Grace close, living each day free of his shadow, and finally stepping into a future that belonged to her. On Grace's first birthday, Julian threw a small gathering at his home. Close friends, laughter, warmth. It was everything Chloe once thought she'd never have. As she watched Julian lift Grace into the air, the little girl squealing with delight, Chloe's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of pure joy. Julian caught her gaze and smiled. "You both are my family now," he said. And in that moment, Chloe knew the truth. She had lost everything once, but in the end, she gained far more. A daughter who gave her purpose and a partner who gave her love. Her story wasn't one of defeat. It was one of rising, of healing, of proving that no betrayal could stop a woman who chose to fight for her own happiness. So my mates, that's how the story closes. If you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a special way. Chloe's pain, her strength, her healing. It's more than just drama. It's a reminder for all of us. Life can be a real bastard and try to break you. But as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Chloe turned betrayal into growth, loss into strength, and found a future brighter than her past. Maybe you've faced your own heartbreaks or setbacks. Remember, they don't define you. You define what comes next. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who might need some hope. Chuck us a like if it stirred your emotions. And don't forget to subscribe to join us in more journeys of healing and resilience. Together, we'll keep finding the light in even the darkest stories. Cheers, Cobber.